Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I see we have a few folks trickling in. Good morning. Good morning. On behalf of the Center for Community Progress, I'm excited to welcome you to the 2024 VAD Academy. My name is Tamara Jones, and I serve as the Director of Conferences and Events here at Community Progress. The VAD Academy, short for Vacant, Abandoned, and Deteriorated Properties Training Academy, is an intensive training for public, private, nonprofit, and community leaders whose work and communities are impacted by challenges related to VAD properties. From breaking down complex systems to sharing smart strategies for resident engagement and fostering compliance, the VAD Academy aims to equip leaders to help return all properties to purposeful use. We are excited to offer the VAD Academy over the course of 2 days, completely free of charge. Day 1 will be providing an understanding of fundamental elements of property revitalization, from strategic code compliance to land banking, whereas on day 2, we'll explore community-driven practices in the field. No matter where you consider yourself in your property revitalization work, we strongly encourage you to attend both days to learn and engage with fellow changemakers. Before I turn it over to our president and CEO, I'd like to go over a few logistics to help you maximize your attendance over the next 2 days. So first, we'll allow a short time at the end of each presentation to answer questions. If you have a question during your presentation, make sure you click the Q&A box below. Time permitting, presenters will respond at the end of their presentation. This year, we are excited to provide you with 1 hour at the end of each day to engage directly with all the instructors. After spending several hours learning about each topic individually, the office hour is an opportunity for you to gain a better understanding of how the topics interact with each other by engaging with all instructors at once. We encourage you to attend to help deepen your learning. Replays of today's sessions, as well as all the sessions over the next 2 days, will be available within 24 hours upon the event conclusion by revisiting the event space. You will also receive an email from Zoom with all of the recordings. During each session, to enable closed captioning, at the bottom right of your screen, you'll click More, and then Captions, then Show Captions to enable closed captioning. You can also use the Resources tab to download presentations and supplemental materials provided by the instructors. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulties, please email Crystal Stevens at cstevens@communityprogress.org. You can also message either myself, Crystal Stevens, or Julia Zimmerman using the chat below. And with that, please welcome our President and CEO, Pat Guillaume-Delamar.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Following in the footsteps of my amazing colleague, Tamara Jones, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 2024 VAD Academy. I am Kathleen Jeannette Guillaume-Delamar, better known as Kat, and I proudly serve as the President and CEO of the Center for Community Progress. It is truly an honor to kick off this year's Academy and to see so many passionate and dedicated individuals ready to tackle the challenges of vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated, or as we call them, VAD properties. For those of you who may be newer to us, the Center for Community Progress is the only national nonprofit dedicated to helping communities tackle the full cycle of vacant property revitalization. We do so through an unapologetic racial equity lens. And we exist because vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties harm neighbors, neighborhoods, and people who for far too long have been ignored. You can't renovate your way out of systemic vacancy, one property here or there. Breaking the cycle of vacancy requires a comprehensive approach, and that's why we're here. Since our very first VAD Academy in 2019, the program has truly evolved. What began as an in-person event has transformed into a dynamic virtual boot camp, allowing us to reach a more wider audience. What started out as a necessity during the pandemic has turned out to be an opportunity to reach all of you. By offering the Academy virtually and free of charge, thanks to our amazing partner, Truist, we've been able to connect with hundreds of thousands from across the country. And matter of fact, not even across the country, let's be clear, around the world. Over the next 2 days, you will hear from some of the brightest minds in community development and urban revitalization. Our incredibly talented team of experts will guide you through critical topics, break down complex systems, and share strategies for resident engagement, fostering code compliance, and reforming policies and practices to be more equitable, efficient, and effective. Our goal is to give you the knowledge to revitalize properties through a people-centered approach. But revitalization is not just about a place. It's about the people who live there. That is why. We would be doing the communities we serve an injustice if we didn't see the people who these revitalized spaces are meant for. As we kick off these 2 days of training, I want all of us to keep in mind, this is not just a training. It's not. It is not just a training, it is a call to action. It's a space where we come together to share our knowledge, our experience, and our commitment to transforming communities. Each of you here today brings a unique perspective and a wealth of experience. You are the change makers. You are the visionaries. You are the leaders who see beyond the blight and envision vibrant, thriving neighborhoods. Whether you work with urban, suburban, or rural communities, VAD Academy, I guarantee you, will help you combat widespread abandonment and neighborhood decline. Each session is an opportunity to learn from the best in the field, and I encourage you to take full advantage, full advantage of the office hours to engage directly with our instructors and ask any questions you may have. Learn from each other, lean on each other. Now, let me give you a brief overview of what to expect. Today, we'll start with an in-depth look at what causes vacancy and frameworks for solutions, followed by sessions on strategic code compliance, not code enforcement, compliance, delinquent property tax enforcement, and how land banks work. Tomorrow, we'll dive into vacant land stewardship, creative placemaking, and resident-first revitalization. Let me say it again, resident-first revitalization. Each session is designed to provide you with practical tools and insights that you can apply in your own communities. Remember, the work we do is not easy. It requires patience, persistence, and a deep commitment to justice and equity. It is also profoundly rewarding. By addressing VAD properties, we are not just improving physical spaces, we are restoring hope, dignity, and opportunity to the people who live there. Your participation in this academy is a testament to your commitment to making a difference. It's inspiring to see such a diverse group of leaders, elected officials, planners, land bank leaders, code encouragement officials, and neighborhood association leaders come together with a shared vision of revitalizing our neighborhoods. That being said, for our first session, I hope you're ready for this. I am delighted to introduce you to my colleagues, Crystal Stevens and Odetta Macleish-White, who will be explaining what causes vacancy, abandonment, and deterioration, and where to start when thinking about solutions. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your dedication, and thank you for your commitment to creating stronger, healthier, more just communities. Let's make the most of this time together, learn from each other, and leave here inspired to act. Welcome to the 2024 VAD Academy. Let's get to work and create magic together. Goodbye.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome. I'm so excited to kick off this year's VAD Academy with some table setting. My name is Crystal Stevens, and I'm the Program Associate for the Education, Leadership, and Engagement team here at Community Progress. Today, I'll be joined by my colleague, Odetta, as we are looking forward to spending time with you introducing some systems-based approaches to combating vacancy in your area. Our goal for this session is to introduce you to many of the concepts that you'll learn about later in sessions and provide a big picture foundation for how all these concepts work together to comprehensively address and prevent VAD challenges. So this morning, we will be introducing you to our property revitalization framework, providing context on the triggers of vacancy, and outlining our systemic approach to addressing VAD properties. Now, I will turn it over to my colleague, Odetta.
Good morning. My name is Odetta Macleish-White. It's such a pleasure to be here. Crystal, good morning. So great to be presenting with you today. My name is Odetta Macleish-White, and I am the Director of Engagement for the Center for Community Progress. And it gives me a great pleasure to spend a little time with you all today to talk about some of the key frameworks that we have created at Community Progress to help explain systemic vacancy and some of our equitable approaches to their solutions. Next slide, please. So we have often used this wonderful infographic to help explain the cycle of systemic vacancy. While every VAD property has its own story and history, from a systems perspective, we can explain how it is created through these various phases. I often talk about the sort of this starting point of the vibrant neighborhood. Many times people we speak to about vacant, abandoned, and deteriorating property have in their personal memory or their family or community memory stories of the vibrant neighborhoods they grew up in, places that were walkable, served by retail and other services, faith communities, homes of different types and styles, and ways to participate in community with one another. However, there were some fault lines that were created. Next slide, please. Historically inadequate, ineffective, thank you, hon. And other ineffective and discriminatory policies and practices contributed to vacancy in community. Next slide. Thank you. Some of the reasons that we have for systemic vacancy include, we can start a little clicks. Gentrification, redevelopment, blight, urban renewal, cleanup, new investment. All of these dynamics are part of the fault lines that are created when inequitable and racist systems touch communities and property. We can go even deeper with some of these systemic issues as we think about income inequality, lack of access to fair education, and to the rule of law. All of these engagements created what I like to call fault lines within these vibrant neighborhoods. Then when you have these triggers that can come through a variety of natural disasters, economic downturns, loss of industry and jobs, those fault lines will open up and create opportunities for vacancy. It might be a pandemic. It might be sudden quarantining. It could be downturns in economy. But when those shocks hit, those fault lines open up, and we find ourselves dealing with a more systemic version of VAD. In a community with a high property value that has perhaps been invested in over time with taxes to create services, strong infrastructure, where economic and educational opportunity have been strong, these triggers can be weathered. However, in communities where they have not had that investment, these triggers can then create weakening confidence in the community. Next slide, please. At this stage of the cycle, we have a number of dynamics that are all sort of feeding one another and sort of pushing and pulling. Where you might have deterioration or abandonment of a property, you begin to develop fewer buyers and less reinvestment. Perhaps there is folks don't have the funds to do this for a variety of systemic reasons I've just mentioned. And you can find yourself leading into slower sales, lower prices, and then investors who want to take up the opportunity of inexpensive land that they can hold. Perhaps those of you who have joined us today can think of your own communities in areas and neighborhoods where you know the owner is not local, but they are holding on rather than investing until they find it's economically feasible for them. When we have those conditions, we can have some very negative impacts of vacancy. Next slide, please. The impact of vacant and abandoned properties can span public health, individual wealth, as well as community fiscal stability. In terms of public health and personal health, they expose community members to unsafe buildings. They can attract crime and or gun violence. And there is a growing understanding of the mental health impact of living generationally in disinvested neighborhoods where there is vacancy. People begin to feel disrespected. They feel that they are not safe, and this creates, especially for children, adverse experiences as they are growing that can impact their emotional and mental health. Individually, systemic vacancy can lower property values, threatening homeowner investment, makes it harder for folks to pull equity out of their homes to pursue businesses and educational opportunities. Cost-effective repair can become hard to obtain. Again, if you cannot, the deterioration is getting worse and you need to be able to make those repairs. Also, higher insurance premiums. These are some of the hidden individual costs of systemic vacancy. And finally, we have community fiscal stability. When folks' property values are reduced and the tax base goes down, that is the shared pot of money from which we can provide services and infrastructure. And then we will begin to see an increase in an uptick in vacancy that further creates that cycle. Next slide, please. Then as we find ourselves, once we are fully in the systemic vacancy cycle, you find it very difficult to break out to bring us back to our vibrant neighborhoods. Each of these elements is fueled and strengthened by the presence of the others and create an environment where systemic vacancy becomes both entrenched and widespread. Next slide, please. So having given you all a framework to think about the life cycle of systemic vacancy, we definitely want to talk about how do we address this. Next slide, please. And Community Progress has also developed an equitable revitalization framework. We believe that policies, practices, and processes for managing systemic vacancy must be equitable, effective, and efficient. Let's talk a little bit about each of these quadrants and some of the ways that we have solutions to help them. Next slide, please. So first, let's think about a community and a neighborhood. Oftentimes, if you have a property that is getting a little deteriorated or has been abandoned, a local government will exercise its powers through fairly punitive methods to eliminate the properties. Crystal, give me a click, please. And one more. This will help us to take out kind of the worst properties, right? The ones that have really gone far and are really, as we had just seen in the earlier framework, having negative impacts on mental health and fiscal stability. Next click, please. Great, so those properties are gone. But now we might also have other properties nearby that are similarly beginning to collect code enforcement penalties. So give us a little click, Crystal, and we can start to see that one more click, and we're gonna just sort of develop, there we go. So now we have homes that are gathering code enforcement designations. The property next door, you'll notice, has perhaps gone tax delinquent. Maybe there are liens that are being placed as the grass is mowed by the city, or hopefully they're doing some maintenance. And there at the end of the block, there's a family still hanging on and trying to stay in the community. One more click, please. That is the person that could really use some help. So now we have a situation where the owner of the property that is not in compliance doesn't respond. Violation notices will continue to be sent with no impact. Court dates might be missed because notices are not being able to be found. And the residents who genuinely want to fix their property but face fiscal challenges to do so don't have formal mechanisms. Right, give me one more click. So this is not working because, as our CEO mentioned at the opening, we want to talk about code compliance versus enforcement. Next slide, please. The goal of compliance is to maintain stability and confidence in the neighborhood's trajectory by ensuring that properties remain healthy and safe places. And we want to enable compliance when a property might be causing harm. When we talk about compliance, we're talking about a broader system supported by a wide range of local government actors, and they can come into partnership with communities and other systemic vacancy partners to achieve property maintenance, managing dangerous buildings, and creating clearly articulated standards for community members. Next slide, please. If compliance efforts worked in every case, we could end right there and talk about our solutions being done. However, the reality is that many VAD properties are stuck in that condition of vacancy or abandonment or deterioration, and we need some additional tactics to move them towards remediation. In many of the communities that we work in, code enforcement and code compliance departments are stretched very thin, and tax collection efforts might be ineffective for fostering compliance. Therefore, we need to think about transitioning properties to new ownership. This must be done in a way that is transparent and equitable and allows the new owner to have the tools they need to take on responsible ownership. Next slide, please. In situations where we can't immediately transfer property to new long-term or permanent ownership, we need to consider some tactics for temporary holding and maintenance and other types of stewarding of properties. Typically, a public, quasi-public, or mission-driven entity can temporarily hold and maintain a property until a viable owner is found. And that is where you'll hear us talking a little bit about land banks. Next slide, please. This final framework element relates to strategies for ensuring that properties are repurposed in ways that yield lasting community benefits. The goal is to have properties with the long-term responsible owners who are going to repurpose the property in a way that reflects community's input, the long-term goals and history of the community. Especially those with public interventions, they should be transitioned to owners who will work in partnership with the local government to ensure that lasting community benefit is achieved. So together, all of these elements implemented in an equitable and efficient manner can maximize community benefit and create tools for moving from systemic vacancy to systemic property remediation and prevention. And I believe with that, we will turn it over to Crystal to talk a little bit more about a case study on both of these frameworks. Thank you.
Thanks, Odetta. And now that we have been given a foundation for the work that we do, I'll provide a little bit more context on our systematic approach to assisting communities in combating vacancy. So first, I think it's important to highlight that while much of what we discuss focuses on stabilizing and repairing physical property, we ultimately do work in service of people and places that they call home. So we believe that effective solutions center equity both in their decision-making and their outcomes. This means that helping neighborhoods recover from disinvestment through intentional approaches to reinvestment, centering community member voices in conversations on how communities should look and where and how investment occur, and recognizing that different situations demand different approaches. A heavy-handed approach is not going to work with neighbors that lack financial resources, and it can lead to inequitable outcomes. So we will shift our focus to a community that I was so privileged to have the opportunity to apply our systematic approach to. The Delta Rising program was a one-year pilot program that provided an opportunity for 4 Mississippi Delta region communities to gather and learn together about ways to address and leverage vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties in their communities. The participating communities were Helena, West Helena, Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Arkansas, Clarksdale, Mississippi, and Elaine, Arkansas. The program included 5 bi-monthly lunch and learns, an in-person gathering in the Delta, and in addition to that, we were able to provide opportunities for customized technical assistance through community progress, and all of which was made possible with the support of the Walton Family Foundation. So before I go into more about the program itself, I think it might be useful to give an impromptu history lesson on the racial and economic dynamics within the Delta, and more specifically, Helena, West Helena, Arkansas, where we hosted the in-person convening. The Delta area has a notable history of codified segregation and sharecropping that has historically defined the relationships between races. However, despite the disenfranchisement of Blacks in the area, the late 19th century and early 20th century have been marked as eras of substantial economic development. This is a result of the presence of railroads providing easy methods for exporting raw materials and required an increase in the industrial sites and lumber mills. In the 1960s, the economy experienced a significant decline due to the mechanization of farming and other factors. This led to high levels of poverty and turmoil racially. By the 2010 census, the population of Helena, West Helena, Arkansas was 75% African American, and that's considering that the total population was only 12,282 people. By the 2020 census, the population decreased to 9,519 people. And as you can imagine, this significant decline has left in its trail high levels of vacancy, abandonment, deterioration, heirs property issues, and more. But not only do these challenges exist related to economic development, but as recently as this year, West Helena experienced a severe water crisis during the planning of this program. So in our planning, we had to consider the challenges that surrounded the human beings in the space. And that was our priority before implementing our programming. So giving historical context, continuing that, we'll speak to the Elaine massacre. This tragic incident was a result of racial tension and long-standing history of racial tension in the area. This was this was an event that occurred in Elaine, Arkansas. However, the massacre memorial is located in Helena, West Helena. With this, we had to go in with the knowledge that there is deep racial pain in the area, in the space. So we had to be sensitive to that. And a part of our programming had to include racial healing as its focus, just understanding the depth of how the pain is. We had to go in with a trauma-informed approach. So after learning more about the history and understanding the deep trauma and pain, we had to facilitate programming that would approach it in a very sensitive way. With years of longstanding mistrust and generational racial pain, we had to establish trust within our team and with the communities that we helped to reach before we were able to implement any sort of program. So respect and learning were our top priorities as we facilitated this program. We understood the importance of putting racial healing and sensitivity to intergenerational trauma and at the forefront of this program. So one of my favorite sessions from our Lunch and Learn program was Delta native Dr. Catherine Meeks was able to bring us her profound lived experience, her scholarship and her activism to bear in service of racial healing and justice around the world and inspire our group. Her experience resonated tremendously with me as a community development professional, but most importantly, as a sharecropper's granddaughter as well. So with that, please turn your attention to the short clip from our last Lunch and Learn session of the program.
Hi, Crystal. I think with you muted, it's muting your video.
With that, let's try it again. Sorry, guys.
It still appears to be muted, so I think we'll have to try sharing the video later after the presentation.
Okay, sounds good. So to shift, to aid in our efforts, we commissioned a team of Arkansas-based attorneys to conduct policy research and review to identify opportunities to advocate for more equitable policies, educate our audience on their rights, and understand the current practices that are in place. These attorneys presented more on their research with the group at the in-person gathering, sharing resources and encouraging policy review for the groups present. Additionally, we connected the mayor of Elaine with a local architect and provided funding for renderings to revitalize their Main Street corridor. This project allowed program participants to reimagine their space and begin to implement these creative reuses. So as you see, this is the current view of Elaine, Arkansas's Main Street. There are very high levels of vacancy. All of the red spaces that you see are areas that are vacant currently. And the mayor of Elaine and a local architect collaborated to reimagine the opportunities in Lane and encourage economic growth and community gathering. So the next slide you'll see is the reimagined Lee Street Community Center. The new uses intended for this space will be to exhibit space for a local store for arts, goods, and books, a youth center for tutoring and educational programs, and a gathering space for seniors to connect and participate in activities. So to aid in our efforts as well, we decided that we had to connect the dots. We felt that it would be important to include local vendors for catering, a mobile tour of Helena, West Helena, Arkansas to have a bigger picture of what the vacancy looks like, and to share from each community on updates as far as how far they've gotten since the program started. So our key takeaways from the program itself were that we had to approach all programming with relationship and trust building, especially in rural spaces. We also figured out that policy review is necessary in a lot of these places, as some of the community members and residents were not aware of some of the policies that were in place. We also connected some traditionally siloed organizations and individuals that would not normally be at the same table. And that was very impactful for each member of participant of the program. So where can you start? So the first place that you can start is gathering your partners. You should consider questions such as who is already working on addressing vacant properties? Who in City Hall might be interested in a partnership? Are there private and community partners that are interested in this work? Who is often missing from these conversations? And from there, you should gather and analyze local data to better understand the systems causing VAD properties and where opportunities for interventions might exist. Both the conversations with partners and the conditions illuminated by your data will ultimately help you determine the right mix of framework policies and practices that can most effectively turn the tide on vacancy in your community. Thank you so much for listening to Odetta and I in this presentation. And we hope that you all gathered something from it, gained some knowledge. So with that, I will welcome Odetta and Tamara to the stage to conduct a Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Crystal and Odetta, for that fantastic presentation. I encourage all attendees to please use the Q&A box to ask any questions. We will be asking questions during this time through the end of our presentation. And then you will also have the opportunity to join us later this afternoon for a 1-hour session with all our instructors for an open Q&A during our office hour. So I'm going to start with this first question that we received from Jim. Odetta, as you were doing your presentation in the beginning, Jim asked, what about the death of an owner as a trigger? How would you plan for or deal with that?
Well, the death of an owner and the impact of that on a property probably relies very much on their estate planning. And I think I want to start by saying estate planning should not be considered something that only the ultra wealthy or wealthy can do with their property. Estate planning and thinking about the single home that you own or the home and the parcel of land that it sits on, any asset that your family has access to is an estate. And thinking about as the person, the living occupant and owner should be thinking ahead and gifting future generations some clarity by by creating a will, thinking about probate of the will, so that once you pass on and the legal system looks at your will and it probates it, and that becomes the legal guidance for anyone else dealing with the property. Okay, that's great, sounds great. How do you get people to make a will? Nobody wants to think about their passing. Oftentimes there's a lack of trust around the legal system, and that too is based on this country's racial history and history of theft, honestly, of land and the ways in which the legal system has been weaponized against Black people and other people of color. So partners, nonprofits, local governments, so many stakeholders need to come together and find a multitude of trusted spaces to share information about creating wills, as well as other legal documents, perhaps powers of attorney and living wills that you might need to help guide, again, future descendants, to guide descendants in what to do. So unfortunately, when people don't do that, you find yourself in the heirs property realm where it's very difficult to clear title. There are processes judicially to kind of cut through some of that, but those can take time, but they should be explored. Judicial in rem is one of those ideas. But really, we try to think here as sort of two avenues. If you are not yet in the situation of heirs property, keep people diverted from it, right? Get that information, support legal aid, help folks create wills and understand the probate process. If unfortunately you're already in an heirs property situation, you need to invest in time to recreate that title and invest in really honest conversations with communities about what it's going to take to resolve the ownership issues, which could lead to, a court sometimes, but hopefully can be resolved with negotiation among the family. And then you can get that title cleared, and whoever ends up sort of in the final ownership of the property then has an ability to take out loans, to upgrade the house, and do other things to keep it going for the next generations.
Thank you. We also had a question from, I'm going to say Jacqueline as a Haitian, that's the way I pronounce that name. So we also had a question from Jacqueline. Has the number of properties dwindled due to the consumption impact of the corporate rental industry? Wow, that is a big question.
Not to talk too much, but I will say, living in Atlanta, the Metro Atlanta area, where we are the, I think, highest in the country for corporate investor portfolios, that is a very big deal. It has taken properties away from middle income and other families who might have tried to purchase a property. Foreclosure crisis is definitely one of those triggers that we were mentioning back in the framework and the cycle of systemic vacancy. That sort of took away the ability for folks to buy their homes, and they were foreclosed and couldn't recover. So now they're trying to rent the same type of home that they once were able to own and build equity in. So finding ways to figure out who the investors are. They also hide behind a lot of shell corporations. It's very difficult to pinpoint exactly who to talk to and who to negotiate with. I think there too, we can have local governments use their bully pulpit to represent and stand up for their communities with businesses, and try to identify which piece of that big portfolio should be offloaded so that the community then has access to it. Or folks in this training will hear about other things like land banks and other models to try and get some of those properties into the hands of that community serving quasi-governmental entity. But I will say this, we are seeing now where investor companies are starting to offload their portfolios. That is now happening. They're looking to sell and consolidate. So do be aware in your local community about that dynamic that is starting to happen, which will sort of, that will concentrate ownership in fewer big entities. Maybe there's a chance to pull some properties out in that moment of transition, and or to try and figure out who's going to be consolidating and try to get to them. So that's definitely a tricky dynamic for sure.
Yeah, and that's something I actually encourage us to have more conversation about during our office hour later today, when we'll have many panelists who are able to think about this question from multiple perspectives. So I would also encourage you to attend our office hour to further discuss that question. Before we continue with our Q&A, I'd like to pass the stage back over to Crystal to see if we can play the video that she wanted to play earlier today.
Yes, let's try it again. There we go. Okay.
It's great to be with you and great to hear the work you're doing. I was in Elaine in 2019 for the unveiling of the memorial to the folks who were lynched in the massacre in Elaine. My father was a sharecropper. I lived in Morrow, which is a few miles from Helena and Elaine, but I never heard about the massacre until I was an old grown woman, because nobody ever taught that piece of history to us or told us anything about it. And maybe it was a good thing not to hear about it when I was a kid, because there were too many things to hear about that were frightening as a youngster growing up in that area. So maybe it's just as well. I remember the murder of Emmett Till and how frightened I was about the safety of mostly my brother, because he was a boy, I think, and I thought my brother was in more danger than me. In the midst of being scared, there was also the little person inside that was always hopeful, always believing that the sun's going to come up in the morning. And perhaps I learned that from my mother, who always said, tomorrow's another day. I didn't quite appreciate the great wisdom in that concept until I got a bit older. But tomorrow is another day, and one knows nothing about what tomorrow's going to bring.
And I thought it was very important to share that because it connects the dots for our work and informs our work in a lot of ways. Having someone with a firsthand account of what that racial inequity in that space looked like, say that there is still hope, inspires our Delta Rising program and Delta Rising participants. So I'm happy that I was able to share that with you all.
Thought you try to make me cry on a morning. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that video. I am going to continue with our Q&A, and as I mentioned, feel free to continue to submit questions. We have a few minutes left to continue our Q&A. The next question comes from Kathy. She's in San Antonio, and her question is, what type of local data can help identify property vacancy?
Crystal, you want to take a stab at that one, or you want me to take a stab at that one?
We can tag team it. I know that in my own experience, census data has been very useful in informing what vacancy looks like in spaces. Odetta, I'm gonna pass it.
Absolutely. Getting the demographic data is so critical, and where you can create a relationship perhaps with your tax commissioner office or assessor's office to from the city or county side to try and just get a list of addresses. Sometimes the post office data set contains some idea around vacancy, and putting that into a map that shows you where things are concentrating and what neighborhoods or streets might be containing clusters of vacant property. You can also invite any local schools, colleges, community colleges, universities to do windshield surveys, perhaps mixed with a little bit of on the street walking surveys, so that you get both a quantitative look, but also the qualitative questions. How are people experiencing the vacancy that is around them? That is just as important, as we talked about, as what it does to their wallets and those other money and numbers things that we can track. Is how are they feeling about their community, and what do they remember? I think a beautiful piece of the qualitative data could be trying to gather history of the communities where these properties might be concentrating. So United States Postal Service, census information, good relationships with your local government that might be keeping data or keeping records around tax delinquency and tax sales, things like that. Universities and colleges that might need a data project for their classes could also be really helpful. And
well, I can add to that as well. From also a community-centered and resident-led approach, also just checking in with the residents in the space or in the neighborhood is also very useful. Sometimes they have more information than maybe is recorded with data. So also just developing those relationships and establishing those connections can be useful as well.
At this time, I'm going to be sharing in the resources a number of links that will help better further your understanding of this challenge. First, I'm sharing the systemic vacancy document. We also have our publication regarding the costs of VAD properties in communities. We have a blog that explains why we at Community Progress do not encourage you to use the term blight when explaining the VAD issue in communities. And finally, we have another blog that will explain how you as neighbors can help in your community. And with that, I'm going to continue with our Q&A. I noticed that we have a couple of folks who are raising their hand. At this time, we're not using the raise hand function. If you have questions, please use the Q&A box. Next. So, do you find a difference in VAD circumstances in rural versus urban? Richard mainly works in rural Illinois, where there's a problem with VAD properties, and the officials do not often know what to do.
Yes, to answer simply, but to go more into that, I think that was something that we discovered very early on in the Delta Rising project. that we were more experienced in different areas than rural spaces. And so I think that that was a lot of the lessons that we learned about trust building and relationship building and understanding the history of that space in particular. So yes, I will say there are differences. Odetta, you may be able to speak a little bit more in terms of the technical side of those differences.
Sure. I think that in rural places where perhaps folks are a little more spread out, it can feel like you're not observing vacancy with the same urgency that you might in an urban space where it's more visible. That's kind of one of the experiences of vacancy that can sometimes affect advocacy and kind of focus. I think that in rural places, there's also this idea of capturing information and data in certain ways. This might be where that you got to get out and talk to people to really construct that understanding of who owned what where is the courthouse, let's get into the courthouse records and really track. In urban places, perhaps there is more investment of dollars to create databases and data sets sometimes, not always. And certainly with the way economic trends are moving and folks are moving towards cities, we do see a lot of depopulation of rural spaces. So just finding ways to keep folks focused on what is happening in rural spaces. Here in Georgia, we have to acknowledge that our rural spaces are very politically powerful. So it would behoove folks to not sort of put rural places to deprioritize them. You need a strategy, you need to understand, and you need to have a relationship with folks in rural spaces just as much as urban, even though urban places are holding a lot of economic growth and shift and change when you come to earning power and things like that. So I think we'll start there. We can perhaps dive a little further, as you've said, Tamara, in the office hours later, but those are some sort of high level differences that I've observed between urban and rural.
Absolutely. I also see a question here from Elizabeth. How can cities develop comprehensive strategies to revitalize vacant and abandoned properties if there is no land bank within the city?
I would first want to say that a land bank, as you'll hear earlier, is a land bank is one strategy. Community Progress believes in it, has invested all along in land banking as a critical strategy, but it is meant to be a tool that can be deployed among others to manage vacancy. So a comprehensive strategy can be led by, spearheaded by a mayor that has devoted community, department level resources to the necessary community conversations, to the data gathering, and to lifting up the situation, right? There's a visibility question. Here we have seen in Georgia, lots of land banks are actually one job of many of a community development department, sometimes an economic development department. Not every place can have the resources to have a whole separate land bank. So I just want to sort of say first that you don't have to have a land bank to create your comprehensive strategy. There are also other plans and neighborhood plans that are created on a regular basis. You could start with those and look into, here's the housing component of our comp plan. Let's add this issue of vacancy to it. What is the data you need? And again, the university and other partners that could help you understand the issue and where you're starting from. I think it's just a question of convening, naming it as an important priority, and asking for some resourcing to sort of sketch out what's going on. And then you'll figure out if a land bank is a tool you need. It could be a land trust. It could be making, a new CDC, or investing in your existing community development corporations to help manage vacant property or repurposing vacant property. I think when we get to the vacant land stewardship component of this training, which I believe is tomorrow, you're going to see some really interesting ideas and concepts for how residents and communities can manage and invest in vacant property. So we'll start there.
Sorry, we have a few more minutes for questions, so I'm going to continue forward. I found a question here from Ismar. How does code enforcement help your goal of decreasing VAD?
I've been talking a lot. Crystal, you want to start with that one?
Yes, so code enforcement is a strategy that can be used to address that, but I know that Center for Community Progress wants to focus more on code encouragement rather than enforcement. Just shifting the idea around what it looks like to have compliance in a neighborhood, taking into account individual situations. So that is one strategy that can be used to address vacant properties.
Absolutely. I think the equitable component of a code encouragement process is creating as much opportunity as possible for a resident to manage the situation, and then saying thank you and giving them some encouragement and reward when they actually do address it. Also, for folks who are managing all along, it's okay to say to them, this is great. We have communities in Georgia that have done door hangers. They do something called sort of gentle code compliance, where they say, listen, we see a problem. If you agree to work on this, we can give you an extra 2 weeks on the typical sort of response time. It is very much about flexibility and giving your code enforcement department the support and space it needs and the resourcing to deal with people individually, and not sort of just process and counting success as getting the most out there. That is one metric you can certainly use, but in a code encouragement or code compliance approach, you're adding other metrics of success regarding contact, folks, staying in place. If you can keep folks in place and keeping their property up, you have shut off the spigot for deterioration and abandonment, right? And at least giving your other folks a chance to come in and talk to that family is what exactly was the problem. If you don't have money to pay for something to mow your lawn or to fix your home, you want them to stay there so you can bring other resources and ask them, why are you having this challenge? Maybe it's a weatherization strategy. It could be an income or grant strategy to help them improve their income. But if they get moved out, now you're dealing with the empty building or the lot. So that is why code enforcement is your first touch point to try and keep folks in place so you can bring other solutions to them.
And to provide an example of a community-centered program surrounding code enforcement, code encouragement, Elaine actually has the CPR program, which is the Community Property Revitalization. And I'm sorry, Elaine, if that's not right, but I believe that that is what that acronym is. It's actually a program where on Saturdays, all the community members come together and they'll go and cut the yards of homes that may be abandoned or have owners who are unable to do it, just to be sure that that compliance is still upheld. And I know that they do not have an individual code enforcement officer, so it relies and rests on the community members to address those properties.
Amazing. And as we are on the topic of code compliance, our colleague Maria has dropped in the chat a link to one of our blogs to explain the code compliance, a general summary of code compliance. And directly following this session at 11:15, our colleague Libby will be having her 101 fully explained session on strategic code compliance as a new way of code enforcement. So please do join us and Libby at 11:15 this morning. That'll be in about 17 or so minutes. So we're excited to have that conversation. We're excited that you all are really engaged in this specific topic. We have time for about 2 more questions, and then we're going to be ending this session. So I'm going to jump into the Q&A, but as I've mentioned previously, we really encourage you to attend our office hour later this afternoon to ask more of these questions to a bigger group of instructors. Okay. Are there policies that a community can put in place to avoid or lessen investors who buy and hold VAD properties?
I'm going to give that one to you, Odetta.
Oh my, I'm gonna get you. No, I think that this is where I would bring land banks back to the forefront, right? The more that you can work with your tax commissioner and tax assessor to move properties that might be vulnerable to investor purchasing, into a land bank, right? And so once it's in a land bank, you accomplish a number of things. You'll hear about this later, but a key one is that a land bank can hold a property sort of off the tax rolls for an amount of time. So kind of a gift of time to the community to be like, okay, we've got X number of properties. Where are they located? Here's where your data comes back in. Like, they appear to all be clustered in a certain street or neighborhood. Is there a nonprofit or CDC or partner that can help with, help the families if they're still there, or help to find new owners if necessary? But once you've got that gift of time and you're not battling against the market and the cash investor who come in and snatch it up, you want to pull things off the market as quickly as you can and before that happens. So land banking is a great first strategy for that. Places we just heard where you might not have a land bank, think about investing in your community development corporations. Maybe you could put a policy with right of first refusal, or some way in which your nonprofits locally could get there for, could be there first to get a hold of properties, and source them some grant acquisition money if possible. We can perhaps look for some specific policies, but I think this is where a land bank in particular could be quite useful in being a space to hold a property so that an investor doesn't sort of grab it up off the market.
Amazing, thank you. I'm going to pull out one final question and then we will be breaking, and I encourage you to return at 11:15 for Libby's session on strategic code compliance. The final question comes from Tamara, and this question is, what are some community engagement strategies you've used or we've recommended to talk about VAD properties and work with the community towards solutions?
So I can take this one. I can give some examples of some of the programs and opportunities that we've provided. One example is the Community Revitalization Fellowship, which will be presented on tomorrow by our colleague Justin and some participants from the program. And that's one program that's focused around centering community and centering the residents in the space and empowering them with the resources and education to address vacancy in their space. And it's also centered around creative placemaking as a tool for combating vacancy in areas. So that's one good example. Another example that I would pull out is I hate to keep saying the same thing over and over again, but the most important thing in engaging the community and combating vacancy is making sure that they are at the table for the discussion. Being able to connect them with maybe code enforcement officers and understanding the policies in their space more plainly can definitely address the issues that might be present in these spaces. Just not being able to have the conversations, it's important to facilitate those and close those gaps. Odetta, do you have anything to add?
No, that's great. And I would just note that we also have a resident workbook on the community progress
Yes, we do.
that could really, that lays out steps very clearly for folks. So we might share that at another time or speak on Absolutely. That later. But yep, definitely engaging residents in the thought process of understanding. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Crystal and Odetta, for your amazing presentation. At this time, we'll be taking a short, about 10-minute break, and you can join us at 11:15 for a session on strategic code compliance presented by Libby Benton. Thank you so much for everybody for joining, and we hope to see you back at 11:15.